That's exactly the experience we've seen in Masdar, our UAE-based renewable energy company that has a program called Wiser, which I think I've seen similar faces, or familiar faces rather, who've been working on Wiser, are focused primarily on female empowerment, and their number is about 37% of their overall workforce. And so to truly unlock, to truly enable, to truly be able to reach a full potential, all resources and skills need to be brought to the table, because different perspectives and different vantage points are shared when everybody sits equally on that table. And from our standpoint here in the Emirates, it's something we've been advocating for a very long time and have been living it. And as Minister who's focused primarily on development, we keep a close eye on programs that are designed also by women, because that perspective ultimately is what helps us manage and also achieve the objectives that we've set forth.
It's a good news story, for sure. For those of you who've been to several COPs, our next discussant is no stranger. Patricia Espinosa is the former Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, and today she is the CEO of 1.5, a consulting firm specializing in climate change. Patricia, happy to have you back.
Thank you, Milen.
Let me ask you, you were such a strong advocate for gender-related issues in your previous role as Foreign Minister of Mexico and as Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC. At the UNFCCC, you oversaw the adoption and initial implementation of the Gender Action Plan, something many of us have supported. The full implementation is, of course, still ongoing. In your new role as CEO of 1.5, what do you feel are the crucial elements that will strengthen a gender-responsive, just transition?
Thank you, Milen, and thank you for having me. Thank you for the UAE for the wonderful leadership also on this agenda, and it's just fantastic to see here two young, bright women ministers from the UAE really leading the effort. Let me start by just making a comment on the reality we are experiencing. At this COP, we had 133 heads of state and government. Only 15 of them were women. So this is a picture of the world in the 21st century that is frankly not acceptable. It's not making any judgment on anybody. It is just, I believe it shows how many barriers there are still out there for women to get to the higher decision-making levels. So we do have a lot of work. The action plan on gender within the UNFCCC, I think, was an incredible achievement. Thanks to your support and the support of so many women around the world. Now, its implementation, in the implementation, I would say we're not yet there. It is true that we have made progress in the sense that the nationally determined contributions, the national climate action plans, mostly do refer to gender, as well as the national adaptation plans. But implementation remains the big issue, remains the big question. And I would say that we need to you ask what are the issues that we need to address. I would say finance, climate finance is not getting to women. It's not about really supporting that space of society. I think it is really about talking about opportunities, talking about building the economy of today and for the future. So I think this is one point. The other point is capacity building, and in the previous panel there was already a mention, for example, of the need to have women really get into science and technical issues to run the economy of the future. So I think we do need to invest a lot more on women capacities, building their capacities, and to enhance the role that they need to play in the transition overall, but in particular in the energy transition. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We're going to turn now to Ole Tunk, who is the Undersecretary for Development Policy for Denmark. Mr. Undersecretary, good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Promoting gender equality and women's rights has been an integral part of Danish development cooperation for many years. How can we ensure climate action supports women's economic empowerment?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here. And first, I really also want to thank our host country for making sure that we have this issue on the agenda, because it somehow tends to fall down when it's crunch time in the negotiations and everything is about emissions. But it's so crucial that we keep this on the agenda, and that's also why Denmark, we are very happy to join this partnership that we are discussing today. Coming back to your question, for Denmark, it's all about the rights of the women, and that's the centerpiece that we have to keep making sure that we have in our focus. And it's both rights in terms of sexual reproductive health and rights, but it's also the women's economic rights. And if you look at how we have tried to integrate that throughout our policy, it's a mainstreaming thing, but it's also thinking about how do we distribute our finances and where does the money actually go to at the end of the day, because they don't flow right now to the majority of projects that are targeted women. It just doesn't happen. So, and that's despite that we know all the evidence points that if we have that in the back of our mind, the outcomes are oftentimes more successful. So we need to change that equation. To name a couple of sectors that I believe are especially relevant in terms of climate change, of course the water sector. Everybody talks about water in terms of adaptation. We need to do more on that. That is so crucial also for women. They are the ones who are suffering when there's no water, and if we have water for them, it frees up time that they can spend on so many other things and avoid sexual harassment, etc. Another sector is of course livelihood sector, the economic empowerment of women. It is so important that job is done and that we think about it because they serve the whole family. They think about the whole family in a different manner. So the impact is just so great on that. And finally, of course, as we've heard and talked about, the energy sector. When there's no electricity in a village, then the ones who suffer the most are the women. On the other hand, if we have electricity, they will have power, and the girls will be the ones who will benefit the most in their education, for instance, and it creates economic opportunities for the women who are there. And that's why we have become more and more engaged in energy access, especially in Africa, which is a huge problem these days. And then as a close thing, I want to turn into what has been discussed and mentioned both by Seema and Celeste on how many women actually work in the energy sector. And I couldn't help thinking that women are smart. They have chosen the sector that is the future. So that's where they are engaging, especially in solar energy. And I'm sure this thing about if women are in leadership position, I couldn't help thinking also reflecting on what you said, if we had more women in the decision-making positions, would we be where we are right now at this COP? I'm not so sure. My bet would be we would be in a better position. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And it's so true, the women who have access, who gain access to renewable technology, for example, often turn those into enterprises and very successful livelihoods. So all of these issues are so interconnected. We're turning now to Geeta Rao Gupta. She is the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues. Ambassador, a gender-responsive, just transition cannot happen without the right financial support. We've already heard that. What steps is the United States taking to address this?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. And I also want to join the other panelists in thanking the UAE presidency for your leadership on this particular topic of gender-responsive, just transition. The U.S., I should add, is proud to endorse the Gender-Responsive Just Transitions and Climate Action Partnership. Particularly, we are excited about the work to amplify locally led decision-making because we're committed to empowering women and girls as climate leaders. But they need financing, Milan, as you said. And that's where the access to financing continues to be a challenge to achieve that gender-responsive just transition. And I think there are three reasons for that. They're the root causes, which is the sort of the gender-related bias and discrimination that's baked into societies, which affects, for example, the access to education that is about science and technology. I remember when I was much younger, this is many years ago, and studying in India, it was the default that all girls went to humanities and all boys went into science. It's only if you question that you got a choice. I hope that's changing now. I see it changing, but that still hinders girls' ability to choose careers that are in the science and technology arena. They also have less access to assets. Women don't have the assets required to provide the collateral to get traditional financing, so that's another barrier. And then finally, women-led enterprises in the science and technology area or on climate-focused sectors are challenged by the low number of women in those fields, so that their networking capacity is limited, their influence is limited, and there's a relationship bias that's towards men rather than towards women. So I think it's important to understand the reasons underlying the lack of access, which is why initiatives like the Women in Sustainable Economies, or the WISE initiative that was launched by the US during the APEC Leaders Week and was highlighted here today at 11 a.m. in our session, are vital to crowd resources to address these challenges. And for those who weren't at that session, WISE is a public-private partnership with governments, private sector, foundations, civil society to bolster women's economic opportunities, and it includes efforts to increase finance flows to women-led enterprises in the sustainable economy, in the green and blue economies. And as part of WISE, the US plans to provide $10 million in support of the next round of funding of the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, what's known as the WeFi initiative, that's focused on women-led small and medium enterprises in the green and blue economies that the World Bank hosts. And we're very pleased that the World Bank has announced that the next round of funding of WeFi will actually be responding to the climate crisis. So the US is proud to be one of the founding members of WeFi. We provided $50 million to help launch it in 2017, together with 13 other donor countries. And that was established precisely to provide women entrepreneurs with increased access to finances, markets, and networks. It operates through several mechanisms, including financial intermediaries, direct financing, capacity building, market access, networks, and policy advocacy, and the goal is to boost the financial flows. So I think the WeFi initiative, the WISE initiatives are the way in which the US is supporting the women engaged in the sectors that we're seeking to now transition to, so that they can actually participate in those.
Thank you very much for that. And lastly, but not least, most importantly, we have Akim Steiner with us. He is the administrator of UNDP, the United Nations Development Programs, and vice chair of the UN Sustainable Development Group. Administrator Steiner, welcome. The UNDP's climate promise aims to ensure that climate action and transition planning is gender responsive. Can you highlight the work that you have undertaken in this work?
I can, Ambassador, and I do so with great joy and pride in joining such a distinguished group of panelists here today, and to you, Minister Reem, as a friend and colleague, also congratulations on making this an integral part of our conversation. As many of you can imagine, heading the United Nations Development Programme, when you work in 170 countries, you not only have to, in a sense, stand the test of have you thought about this issue, but can you also take it to scale? Because we can all experiment, but for 3.5 billion women and girls who are, in a sense, living in today's energy economy, in today's transitions, it really is also a matter of the here and now. So I very much embrace this challenge that I think we have all struggled with over the years of how do we empower people in decision-making process that traditionally exclude or overlook. We can put it in different ways. Women, and one example, to give you a very practical one, has been our commitment to work with countries on their nationally determined contributions. I truly consider these acts of national and sovereign expression of how to deal with climate change, but not only as an emission problem or financing problem, but actually as a just transition issue also within society. UNDP, with the climate promise leading up to Glasgow, already supported 120 countries as part of a consortium on their NDCs, and we worked very hard to put into the NDC templates, together with the Secretariat of the Convention, explicit questions about how would women participate, what issues about gender should be reflected on in an NDC explicitly, because how you ask a question is already how you influence the answer. I'm very proud and pleased to say that the uptake was enormous, and we have seen already in many countries through the NDCs a very different conversation emerging, not changing reality overnight, but emerging about how to answer differently the question about energy transitions. Let me take you to another example very much on the ground in our work, sadly, and let me here also echo Aisha's introductory remarks. We live in an extraordinarily painful time. Whether it is what's happening right now, just 2,000 kilometers from here, whether what is happening across the world, what is happening in Afghanistan to women and girls, just as relevant to the discussions here also about access to energy. We work in many crisis countries, and our challenge at that moment is perhaps not even a transition, it's just survival, and how climate change and access to energy becomes a matter of survival. In Yemen, we have a wonderful example where over the last few years we have in fact engaged in precisely, Ambassador, what you also referred to just now, entrepreneurship. We have trained women solar entrepreneurs. They are running the mini off-grid solar installations in a country where there is virtually no power supply anymore. And therefore solar becomes a way of actually having access to electricity. And these women have been remarkably successful. They are entrepreneurs. We train them both as mechanics and as operators of these mini-grids, and they have been so successful that they've even been featured on BBC World and many other programs, because it demonstrates that women can, even in an extreme situation of a survival economy like Yemen, be central to access to energy in their community. And I take that example then from a few hundred women to literally millions of women. UNDP today is leading a consortium of organizations that is working with 21 African economies on supporting the establishment and installation of mini-grids and off-grid solar. If the program succeeds, it could enable up to 260 million people on the African continent to gain access to electricity, affordable electricity. Just imagine the extraordinary opportunities if we design this with a gender-conscious lens, what this could create in terms of access to electricity, but also entrepreneurship, income, livelihoods. And to me, these are the examples that take us very much to the front line, where women today are struggling with just transitions, with climate change in terms of its impact, but also we can create new opportunities. And a final example that really speaks to this issue also of how do we change our institutions and their ability to think and operate differently. And I have my dear colleague Seema sitting here. We are partners in crime, so to speak, within the United Nations family, on trying to constantly ask ourselves, how do we raise the level of awareness in institutions? UN Women does a wonderful exercise for all our agencies, reviewing them every year in terms of their performance on gender. In UNDP, we have translated that into something called the Gender Seal for an institution, which is a series of very rigorous testing steps where you gain a seal depending on how rigorous your gender focus and responsiveness and provisions in an institution is. Interesting enough, in many countries we work, and this was originally developed for our own offices, there are now ministries and public institutions who say, can you please do this with us and for us? Because sometimes it's not the unwillingness to act, it's the lack of understanding how you can act that actually is the key to the next door that we can open together. So just a few examples to celebrate very much the spirit in which you have brought us together here today. And Razan, also thank you very much for your warm welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Those are terrific examples, and taking this to scale could just be transformative. So thank you for that. I'm going to ask the first group of this panel to please come up on stage so we can do a photo, but also thank the whole group for their wisdom and, more importantly, for the work they do every day. So if the first group could join.